I want to just take a moment now and welcome you all as you continue to come in. Welcome to United. This is the ICF Southeast Region Town Hall on breaking down barriers of race and systemic inequality. My name is Tanya Eccles, and I'm president of the ICF Georgia chapter. And before we go any further, I just want to thank you all for joining us today for this extremely important conversation and extremely timely conversation. When I originally shared the idea and started working with Anique on pulling this together, it was with the intention of creating and holding space for each other as coaches and as those of you who are in attendance who may be connected to the coaching community. As coaches, we're usually the ones holding the space for others, but given this incredible circumstances that we have already experienced in 2020, this additional awakening, or in some ways perhaps a reckoning, of the deep-seated issues of racial inequality within our country and honestly around the world have really ripped open a wound that's been festering, again, both here in the US and everywhere. I know some of you may wonder why now? And others of you may ask, well, why is this issue focused squarely on Black people or people of African descent in the United States? And there are many factors that play here, from the pandemic to, technology. I mean, the fact that we have video cameras, all sorts of things are at play here. But one idea that I've been I have been sharing about why so specific on this topic of Black people and racial inequality is because ultimately, the institution of slavery in the United States and the policies and regulations that were upheld both legally and implicitly in the country, even after slavery was abolished, has in many ways become the blueprint in the modern age for oppression and segregation around the world even. Even as we saw with colonization and other parts of the world started to move away from it, the areas that didn't, and we saw that here, we saw that in parts of Africa, it very much was built on a blueprint of what was done here in the US. So the focus of the specific impact of racial inequality for Black people in the US is best described, I think there's a statement and a variation of the statement's been going around the last few months, but if your house is the one burning down right now, do you want to hear, no, we need to worry about all the houses, or do you want someone to help you put out your fire and save your house right now? Focusing on that one house doesn't negate anyone else's. It's truly an effort to focus on the immediate, imminent danger. So as we move into this discussion today, it really is intended to be that space and conversation, and it's not to create policy or do anything more than offer an opportunity for us to have the tough conversations and pulling us together as an ICF region and pulling an ICF Global, who I personally, as a woman of color, have been so happy to see that ICF Global stepped forward as a body to take a stance on this, and that they've been so open to us creating the space for us to move forward today. So as we further our discussion, I want to introduce you to the wonderful members of our panel today who are going to represent various parts of the Southeast region, as well as ICF Global. So we have Anique Clemens, who's our Senior Development Manager for North America. We have Aretha Costley, who is our Volunteer Engagement Director for ICF Global. Akasha Saunders, ICF Caribbean President-elect. Tim Kincaid, ICF North Texas Secretary. Michelle Norris, ICF Central Florida President, Jaslyn Roberts, ICF Charlotte Past President, and Kim Moore, ICF Houston President. So welcome to everyone. Welcome to the panelists. I'm so glad to have you here. Again, as we start to have our discussion today, we're really just going to start out checking in and starting that conversation with our panelists that we've brought, and then we're going to give you some opportunities to move forward and have some smaller discussions in breakout rooms as we kind of wrap up our session. But wanted to start out with our panel and starting really to get a viewpoint from global. So Anique and Aretha would just love to hear sort of what's happened from the time of the statement coming out in June, and what do we see as resources and opportunities going forward?
Thank you so much, Tanya. It's so wonderful to be with you all today. I wanted to, I did put in the chat the link to the ICF statement that's on our website, which was issued on June 1st. and it's a statement condemning racism and systemic inequality. And just to quote a part from it, the continued perpetuation of systemic inequality is at odds with our shared values and vision at ICF. As coaches, we know that change often begins in moments of discomfort. Change begins with tough conversations. Change begins when we open ourselves to feedback about where we are getting it wrong and to guidance on what we can do to get it right. We must act. So really, we wanted to create an open space for this dialogue. The Southeast region was able to put this together, and so that we could really hear all of our voices and we can add to this discussion. And I wanted to introduce Aretha Costley. She's our new volunteer engagement director, and she's also been charged to lead our diversity and inclusion movement. And I know she has a task force that she's working with now. So Aretha, if you could give us just a brief overview of where we're headed next from this statement.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share what ICF's plan is going forward. And let me apologize. My pool guy is outside right now and my dogs are having a fit. I am so sorry. I apologize for that. But we know being in this world, this technology, things happen, so I apologize. So I'm just so thankful that this conversation is about to get started again. As Tanya mentioned earlier, this is something that didn't just happen yesterday. And so the fixes are not something that we want to just put in place right now and then forget about it. It is a movement. It is something that has happened for so many years. And I'm so glad that not only ICF, but there are so many organizations that are standing behind Black Lives Mattering. And the thing about Black Lives Mattering is we're not asking for a lot. We're asking to recognize that we do matter and that we do have a stance in this United States of America and throughout the world. So ICF's plan right now is to have a second statement, which I've been working on to further substantiate what we said in the very first statement. This statement is going to relay throughout the ICF's ecosystem the action plans that ICF is going to uphold and continue. This is not a one and done situation. As I mentioned, this is something that's going to be ongoing. And we want everyone to understand that there's going to be opportunities for everyone to get involved, have some forums, discussions, meetings. And we all know that these conversations are going to get very dicey. But the thing with that is that's how the learning begins. It's going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be things that you're going to have to look at within yourself and say, hey, maybe I do have a bias. And how do I deal with that? So let me just share a couple of things. This has not been approved by ICF Global, but I can share just a couple of things with you. The problem statement that the Tiger team, that's what I call it, because we're coming in and we're getting this set up, is ICF's values of inclusivity, diversity, and professional enhancement of global stakeholders are at odds with human and social injustices such as racial tension, systemic inequality, and government contention. We know that not only are those things happening here in the United States, our footprint as an organization is so far reaching that this Black Lives Matter movement was the catalyst for everything that's happening within the world. So that's the problem statement. The purpose statement is ICF will purposely support dismantling global systemic inequality, racism, and violence using ICF's new business structure, FO stakeholders, existing and potential partnerships in the ICF ecosystem. And there's a proposed 3-phase plan. And like I said, you are getting this hot off the press. Shh, don't tell anybody. We're still trying to ensure that Global is on board, but this is something that they wanted to happen. And the very first part of this plan is to look at ICF itself. What type of diversity do we have? What are we doing with our diversity? How can we cast out a bigger net to bring ICF diversity, looking like everyone, not just one specific group? So we're all looking at a 3-phase plan. We're having a second statement that the CEO right now has, that she is going to propose to ICF, the board, to ensure that we are making sure that this one statement ensures that we are aligned with what we said about we must act. When I read that first statement and we said we must act, it's great to have a statement, but what do you do with it after that? And so I am just so thankful that a lot of chapters have jumped on board as I'm working in the background to do these conversations and these forums and these discussions, because ultimately we're all going to be working together. We are in plan 2 going to have a landing page that's going to be a repository of discussions, books, workshops that are available, and some facilitated discussions by our regional teams, our ICF leadership, and vice versa. And then thirdly, the third phase of this plan is again to ensure that we are continuously having these conversations. As I mentioned before, it's not a one and done. It wasn't a one and done 400 years ago. It has been throughout history that this has happened. So we are carefully looking at how to ensure that ICF takes that one step towards us acting to dismantle a lot of these things. And so with that in mind, like I said, hot off the press, and you will see some more things come out as far as community of practices, global discussions, forums, chapters with events and different things like that. So please stay tuned.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Aretha. And yes, it's just a small, intimate group of 160 of your closest friends. So I'm sure it'll just stay here. But we do appreciate you sharing it. And also that ICF Global is, to your point, taking action. So it wasn't just, I'm going to release the statement and okay, now we feel better. It's no, this will continue. And also knowing that it will continue, knowing it's not going to be just the one and done, or it's not, oh, once we do this, it will all be accomplished. This is ongoing. This is work that's going to continue to grow and develop as we all continue to learn and grow. So thank you, both you and Anique, for sharing that perspective and giving us that insight. And with that, I'd love to move into our discussion with our panelists and really just open the conversation. And our purpose in opening the conversation is really just to share our own experiences. This is hopefully, again, the more vulnerability and openness that we create, and we know as coaches how important that is in creating our coaching presence, and also just being humans with each other, that we can share our stories and our different perspectives, will hopefully open up your mind and your hearts and your eyes to how you could start to continue these conversations with those that you work with, that you live with, and those in your own community. So I'm just going to open it up really to all of you, Kasha, Tim, Michelle, Jaslyn, Kim, with the first very simple question is, what does this topic mean for you? What does this issue of racial inequality and systemic racism mean for you as a person, as a human?
I'll go.
Yeah.
Just because I feel like jumping in, right? So I want to just frame this as the infant in the group. This is all very new to me. And I was deeply moved during the George Floyd incident to a manner like, I think it was the continuous, like it was the third or fourth thing in a row of innocent people being slaughtered. And so I started to awaken. And I'm going to start with what I think is, our biases are implicit and they're unconscious. And so much of who I am thought I was awake. And you know, I work in this space all the time. I am very conscious of the fact that what we crave as human beings is connection, and that everybody has a lens that they're looking through. And mine was really, really cloudy. And so what I learned right away is don't call my Black friends and ask them to help me, that I better do my own work. And so that's what I started to do. And I have been in a deep reckoning ever since, because I didn't know what I didn't know. And so much of my privilege was unconscious. And so this is now a fire under me, and I'm just so committed to doing my work. And it's, you know, it starts out where you say, well, what can we do? And here's what I know. I know I can work with people in helping them become courageous and helping them learn their vulnerability and learn what they personally have to do before we can even enter this conversation. So I'm not entering this conversation as an expert. I'm entering this conversation as a vulnerable learner. And I want to have this conversation so that I get to understand more of others. And so I'll just say that I'm here because I'm curious and I'm thirsty.
Yeah. And that's again, one of the core things that we do as coaches, to show up with curiosity, not with judgment, not with the need to be an expert in anything. It's just, if I show up in the full presence of who I am, that's how we can start to affect change for ourselves and for others. And thank you for sharing that, Michelle. Yep. Who else? Akasha, Kim? Yeah, go ahead.
Jocelyn, I'll go next.
Yeah, please do.
When I saw the word barrier, the thing that I thought about was as an obstacle. And when the killing of George Floyd happened, for me, I thought, okay, this has been happening for such a long period of time. Now it has reached cumulative impact, because we got to see the horrific killing of someone on TV, and we absolutely could not turn away. And when we think about everything that has happened, trifecta, there is the pandemic, people are out of work, the killing of George Floyd. Had we been working, we may not have seen that, but what we may have said is, and the comments that I typically hear is, well, we don't know what happened before you got to that point in the video. And living in a society, being a Black person, and knowing and hearing all the different things that are happening to Black people, particularly being killed, you know, I thought, oh, now we can have the real conversation. You know, because when we talk about systemic change, you know, if we really think about it, there are three different levels that gets to a system. There's the individual. You're absolutely right. We all have biases and prejudices. We take those biases and prejudices and we form groups. We form like groups. And so it just continues to perpetuate in the group. But the groups are also the ones who will go and create a corporation or a system. And so now you start thinking about, what are the policies and the practices, you know, that are inside of these organizations, in these corporations, that continue to perpetuate. And even though there are three different levels, they all flow, it flows back and forth because they all impact each other. So, you know, so this has just really been a horrific time for me as a Black person living in America. But I am so looking forward to having these real conversations, not surface. You know, this is, you know, as I said, this is cumulative impact. Now we can have really real conversations about the injustices and the inequities in our society.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you so much. And again, having the real conversations, speaking what's happening. There are murders. There are people being killed in the streets. Black bodies being killed in the streets. And this is why we want to have this conversation. Anyone else from the panel?
Tanya, I'll jump in just to build from Houston, Texas ICF, and a kid that grew up in Texas with Texas mom and a Tennessee dad. And why that's important is they both grew up as sharecroppers, barefooted, and their best friends were also sharecroppers who weren't white. They were Black sharecroppers, and those were the pictures I grew up with, which was lots of families without shoes, and all very, very poor. And so I'm one generation away from that, and seeing it, I grew up with a set of eyes that said anyone's fair game to be a friend, anyone's fair game to play with, to be a best friend. And when I was in high school, my best friend, who was a Bible study person, I don't care what faith practice you're in, the point was he and I were very, very close, both class presidents, vice president, ran together, did everything together. We're too busy to do anything other than work together. And we decided we'd go to the high school prom together because we both were going to be working. Why not? And my parents said, you may not. Keith Clay was a black guy. He was my best friend, best athlete. And what this topic means to me is a chance to say something about the separation that caused. And I say that there was no chemistry, no romance. That was just a best friend. And my parents said, perception is everything. Perception is reality. You may not go. I had to tell him, and we never again spoke. And he was my best friend. So what this topic means to me is that there is an unconscious choice to fit into a culture that will punish you sometimes if you step out and embrace something that looks a little different. And my parents had the benefit of education and some other things that continue to separate me. So this allows me to do something that's hurt for a long time. And as a chapter president, to be able to step behind ICF Global statement and say, we will not be blind, we will listen, and we will address the fact that if you've grown up white, you've grown up in a white worldview, and that it's systemic, and we can be about, as coaches, having a presence that's willing to be honest about what we see. And then we get behind the people that need to lead us in the effort with heart and with compassion and with honesty of what's happening. So what this topic means to me is to be no longer muffled, blind, and comfortable, period.
Period. Thank you so much, Kim. And to your point about the ICF, being able to stand behind the ICF words and just as one ICF, we stand together. We stand for greater diversity and inclusion. We stand against racism. We stand against violence. We stand for respect, dignity, and integrity. And that is lifted straight off of the statement. And that says everything about who we are as an organization and who we are in our values as chapters and as individuals. And, you know, to your point, you don't know unless you know. I knew when I was 4 or 5 years old, when someone told me that the reason I was Black is because God had cooked me too long. That was really, and I was just like, what are you talking about? And so I've known from a very young age, but if you didn't have that experience, how would you know? And that's what this conversation is about. Okay.
Yeah,
Anyone else before? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll pick up from that, Tanya, because I'm an outlier in some ways in that I grew up and lived in the Caribbean. And so I learned very early, like you were just alluding to, that the tentacles of white supremacy and racism extends beyond the US boundaries. You know, so in the Caribbean, I knew very early that I was underdeveloped because America said so, you know, because of my geographic location growing up in Jamaica. Our country and our neighboring countries were less than. And so I actually internalized that. You know, so if my country is underdeveloped, that must mean I am too. You know, I didn't have, you know, certain things that the American society had in general, or that the establishment says that this is what development means. You know, so that's one of the reasons why this topic means a lot to me, because of how we dominate and label other cultures, other races. Another is a little bit more personal, because I have a 13-year-old son. He's going to be 14 in a few months. God, I can't believe this. And he has cerebral palsy. But besides that, a few years ago, we watched When They See Us on Netflix, the Central Park 5 case. And since that showing, whenever I'm going to workshops, whenever I'm traveling, one of the first questions he asks me is, Daddy, are there going to be white people there? And he asked that out of fear and concern for me. So if I say yes, he said, Daddy, please be careful. Like my 12-year-old kid is telling me, like, be careful of white people. I'm like, well, son, not everybody is like that. But that's me trying to convince him. And so I am wanting him to grow up in a world where he actually knows for himself that it is safe. But that's not a reality yet, not for all of us, not for Black people. But I'd love for that to be the case. The other big thing that's a big reason for me here in this conversation is, I was involved in a team coaching process. Like a colleague and I, we were putting together this men's retreat, and we were being coached by a white woman, a brilliant coach. And I was having this experience in the interaction where I felt my colleague was a white man was getting a lot of attention in the coaching session. It's like, and whenever I say something, it didn't land for her at all. She would actually ask him sometimes, what do I mean? She's a white American coach. And so one session, I was so nervous. It's like there was this line. It felt like this line, talk about barrier. It felt like this line that I had to cross to say, this is how I'm experiencing being in this coaching conversation right now. And so I'm feeling outnumbered because of my race and because of my geographic positionality as well, to say, hey, is this racism or what's going on here? Because I feel really uncomfortable when I say something, you don't acknowledge it, you don't recognize me. And so my heart was in my mouth, and I knew I had to speak up, because it was a really uncomfortable situation. And we were paying, it's a coaching situation, so we were paying her. And so when I said this, when I brought it up, both of them looked at me and said, something is wrong with you. There's no racism here. You need to check yourself. And I wanted to melt. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to vanish from that conversation. I felt I had a complete out-of-body experience. And I thought, there's no way I would want anyone else to experience that, as they're working with a coach that's of a different culture, of a different race from they are. So I'm in this conversation for some of those reasons and many others, but I think I'll stop there for now.
And there is that question of am I making it up, or am I being gaslighted? Are you just telling me it's not? Like, I know what this is, I know how this sounds, and you're just saying I'm crazy, and there's 4 of you and 1 of me, and maybe I am. And that we have lived in a society that has told us for hundreds of years that you're being too sensitive. And now we aren't always, until someone actually gets murdered, until you see a murder on video in front of you, that seems to be the thing that helps people start to transition. But to understand that that's something that we've all faced all our lives to some degree. Tim.
Hello, good morning. I don't know where to begin, actually, except I'm coming to this with from a place of, well, hopefully curiosity, but also humility. There's some sadness too, just hearing these stories and thinking, that's not my experience. And just kind of, there's just a cognitive dissonance thing going on for speaking for me. And I'm also noticing some of the things that you're describing can describe my experience. I'm a white male, and I have white male privilege, and I'm really getting my head and heart around. Oh my God, I do. I worked hard, and just I have this benefit that just through the grace of birth, I suppose. But also knowing that as a gay man, once I disclosed that, and I just came out to 160 something people. I suddenly have diminished my standing in the pecking order, and so the things that are coming up for me from the descriptions, the things that you've been describing, Akasha, you had to speak your heart and say something, and that to me was like coming out. You were revealing something that they couldn't see, and that is that's one of the scariest things one can do. is it safe to do that? In your case, it sounded like it was not. And it's a judgment. So there's a great deal of courage that comes along with that too. So I can't say that it's evolving, it's beginning. And I think Tanya, as you said, and others, I think Aretha also said, it's not one and done. It's a work of a lifetime. And there is, I think there was a Rumi poem where he challenged people, don't go back to sleep.
Thank you for sharing that, Tim, and thank you for sharing your own personal story and experiences. And even though you may not be able to correlate to this specific one, we all have that connection of feeling excluded, feeling left out, feeling less than. And if you've ever had that experience in any way, in any part of your life, I just ask that you start to think about, what if you experienced that every day? What if you felt that every single day? How would that impact your life? How would that impact your mindset? How would that impact your ambition and your goals and impact your whole family? Okay, so thank you all for sharing that. I truly appreciate that. I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, but I will just ask one more question before we open it up for other questions to keep us on track with time, and really want to talk about, how is this impacting you as well as your chapters? What are you seeing? What are you hearing in your local chapters about this?
What I want to say real quickly is that ICF Houston has started a conversation on systemic racism offered to members in across the city. So our outreach director Sandra Boyatsis and I are promoting that, along with John Sakara, who's on here as well. And we deeply appreciate that effort, and we will keep it going and see where that awareness and effort goes. And I also want to say, as a chapter leader, it's interesting to have the conversations that would tend to shut this effort down by those who would say that we're leaning in a direction of becoming political. And I see this as anything but political. I see this as human and aligned with our shared values. And it's gotten quite heated already. So it's an honor to stand in the shoes and say, this is about who we are as coaches. It is not a political issue, will not get shut down as it has in the past by the discomfort that brings to some people, regardless of where they sit in the community.
Yeah, there's a point where it's political and it's about the human.
Yep.
Right.
The humanity of it.
Right. And I can say as a chapter leader as well, is that, you know, I wrote a statement and then put it out to my leadership team and said, you know, I want to go out with this statement and I want to make sure y'all are comfortable. And everybody was comfortable with it, but somebody said to me, well, you're making some very bold statements here. And I think that's your intention. And if that's your intention, then I'm fine. But I just want to make sure that's your intention. And the statement was, we as a chapter are not diverse enough. And we as a leadership team are definitely not diverse enough. And we need to change that. And it was my intention, and bold is my intention as a chapter leader, because you can't sit in comfort on this. This is not a comfortable conversation. This is not a comfortable time. It's uncomfortable for a reason, because we're pushing boundaries that we have as white people, as any kind of other, right? In a binary world. And we have to make a statement that this is a human race. And I don't care who you are or what differences you have, unless we have everybody in the conversation, we're not diverse enough, and we're never going to move this conversation.
Thank you, Michelle. And I see it being echoed in our chat in so many ways. This is not about politics. It's about humanity and about how we treat each other and the values that we hold. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're here having this conversation, because thank you to the ICF Global for making it clear and reinforcing what those values are, and now how do we want to start to move them forward. Before we open it up to Q&A, want to hear if anyone else had any comments on what they're seeing or hearing in their local chapters.
Yeah, I had a couple of things to share, Tanya. Thanks for that space. You know, one is I appreciate these comments about politics and the political as well. And I mean, our experience, my experience as a Black person is that, you know, the personal, my race is also political. You know, so the reality of it is that it is, and I appreciate the reference, the naming that it is also about our humanity. But I think both are true. Both are lived experiences for us. The thing that I want to speak to in terms of what's happening in the Caribbean chapter relates to mostly to access and the image of coaching. You know, so coaching, coaches and coachees look white for us. Okay, so in the Caribbean, a part of it is really sort of coloring coaching, adding some color to it so that those we are serving in that region can actually see themselves represented, both as potential coachee as well as potential coaches. You know, so it's a talk about the barriers to entering this field. You know, it's a white wall for the most part. You know, and so how do we sort of either both tear the wall down, but also show that this noble profession that's really geared towards helping humanity grow and be better has space for the the various colors that make up humanity. Okay, so and what we're doing is like creating opportunities where folks in the Caribbean, where Afro-Caribbean, in the Caribbean people can actually engage in conversations with us around coaching. And we're making these accessible to them. You know, because another perception is that coaching is outside of their economic reach. You know, so, and that I think is a white capitalistic thing as well that we are trying to combat. You know, it's like, not because you're Black doesn't mean that you cannot afford coaching. Not because you're in the global South doesn't mean you do not have access to coaching. So that's specifically some of the ways that we're addressing this issue in our region.
Wonderful. And thank you all for sharing.
Hi, Tanya. Hi, my name is Miriam and I'm attending from ICF Raleigh. I did put my comments in the chat and I want to share with everybody. I mean, I'm originally from Iran, so I am part of the other, but you know, it's just like, it's interesting to be part of this conversation. So we here at ICF Raleigh, we had a 3-day summit, virtual summit, June 24 to June 26, and we did have a conversation around diversity and inclusion, and it initiated so many, I don't know, like very uncomfortable conversations as you all have been discussing, and we are continuing that. We are continuing the conversation, although it's uncomfortable, although it makes us be in that space that, you know, we haven't experienced before, but we're embracing it together. And we're trying to get out of it better than what we entered into. So I just wanted to share that with you. So Sakina Gordon-Jones, she did the conversation on inclusion and diversity, and we're discussing like how we can proceed with
Thank
that.
you so much, Miriam. And I know that there have been chapters all over the country and the world doing this same type of work, and we thank you for sharing that with us. And with that note, let's move into asking some questions. So what we're going to do is ask that you raise your hand, and that way we can keep all the voices, because you know Zoom starts to cancel everyone out. So if you go into you should be able to see a raise your hand icon there. We've all been on Zoom for a while, so hopefully we all know how to raise our hands. But
I believe it's under participants.
Under participants, so hopefully.
We can't see it as co-host, but yes, I believe it's under participants.
Yeah, so I see Steve Jones has raised his hand. So we have time for a couple, but we want to make sure you have time to get you into your breakouts as well. So Steve, I'm going to bring you on. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be part of this conversation, but one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that not only do we have the conversation, but we need to take action and demonstrate that we are caring and part of the change that's happening. And one of the things that I want to know is, how can I demonstrate on a more regular basis that I am part of the conversation and that I am part of the change that is happening?
Yeah, and I'll, if anyone else has a comment, I will just jump in and say the way that we demonstrate it is through our behavior, through the actions, pulling together these types of conversations, being very vocal about it. That is going to be the way that you really can, you want to walk the talk, as they say, right? You want to show the action, because I think we spent hundreds of years and decades talking, and now we have to do, and not have to do, we want to. If anyone else has anything to share.
Yeah.
And I wanted to add too, it's being uncomfortable, right? So, last week I had someone say to me, well, all lives matter. And I just jumped right in this conversation with a person I don't know very well and said, I beg to differ. And this is why I believe this. And we then had like a 20-minute conversation. It's seeing very subtle things happen and then being courageous enough to say, I'm going in. I'm jumping into this. It's uncomfortable. It's out of my box, normally, but I know enough to know what is right and what is wrong for me. And I don't have to get it right. I don't have to be right. I just have to keep trying.
I'd like to add something, Tanya, if you don't mind. I've been trying to raise my hand just to say a couple of things. I'm so sorry. One of the things that, and I know I'm going to say his name wrong, from the Caribbean, Akasha. One of the things that you had mentioned, Akasha, was about the social economic divide of a lot of the communities, and they feel as though that they cannot get coaching because of the cost of coaching. I wanted to also, hot off the press, let you know that there's one initiative that our CEO is very adamant about, and that is to provide scholarships and work with different communities to provide scholarships for people who are in that situation, who want to help their communities and give that coaching. So I do have a meeting scheduled later on this week with ICF Foundation for some pro bono coaching, some training initiatives that's coming through, the coaching and training support staff and different things like that. So that's one of the things that I wanted to mention. Right. Another thing, Steve, I was trying to get to your question and you were asking about how do we make change? How can you show that you're an ally? And Tanya mentioned to show it through your behavior. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. Over my, I know I look like I'm 22, but over my 54 years of life, I have felt like I have had to be Black academia, meaning everything that someone didn't know about or wanted more information about, I would have to expound on and give them the research and different things like that. And at a point for me, and I don't know if anybody else feels like this, it was tiring, it was draining, and it was like, man, I don't speak for all of Black America, but my thoughts, my perspective, my vision has changed. Now it is more prevalent than ever for me to have those conversations, especially if you're reaching out to me and saying, Aretha, can you talk about why this or why that? I stop what I'm doing and I'm having these conversations because I need to have these conversations. I have a son who is 26, who's in an interracial relationship. I don't care. That's who you love. That's who you love. But when she stops and she calls me mom, we're very close, and she asks me questions, I have to stop and give her that knowledge because she really doesn't know. Now, there's a difference between being blind and really not knowing, or allowing your bias to just run off and make its own assertions. At this point, it's more prevalent, more needed, more critical for us to stop and have those conversations. And like Tanya said, when we start talking about the behaviors, that's how your action starts to turn that wheel. Don't forget, it's been happening for so long. The wheel was turned, I say, backwards so many years ago. Now there's an opportunity for us to turn the wheel forward in light of everything that's going on, and make it a positive change. And that's why now I'm like, I need to have that conversation. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. It doesn't matter. But two things that I wanted to share with you, and you'll see this in phase 2 when we start building the landing page. This book called Blind Spots. I have read this, I have highlighted, because we all have blind spots. We all have agendas. We all have something that, oh, it's not happening to me. I'm not going to deal with it. I don't want to. We all have them, rightfully so, because we're humans. One of the things that I take to heart every morning before I even turn on my computer is I do my own Bible meditation. One of the things that I really looked at in the Bible, and I'm not trying to go in that direction, is that everybody was created as one, just one. God says, love everybody. Does not matter what color, what sexual orientation. He didn't say only love this person because it's this color, or that person because of that. It was love everyone. I don't know if you've ever heard of Jane Elliott. She did a black eye, blue eye study so many years ago. And she said, I cannot believe I felt so, heartbroken and disheartened by what I saw in that study, because she actually felt the oppression of being in one of those categories. So if you haven't looked at that, take a look at the Black Eye, Blue Eye study. It's on YouTube. She is an ally. She has always been an ally. And another thing I want you to take a look at is the experiment. I can't remember who it was, where they had Black children and they had 2 dolls on the table. One doll was white, one doll was Black. And they asked the children, and these are kids, they're not adults, these are kids,
Little
kids to pick the best doll, the good doll. And you will be amazed. And I'm not going to tell you what doll they picked, but you will be amazed at why these little children picked that doll. And just kind of think about that. Why is it that they think that Black is bad, white is good? Just kind of melt that in your heart and really think about how we have changed from going to everyone is created equal, we all bleed the same, we all sneeze the same, to you go to that category, I'm gonna put you in that category, and you're gonna go to this category. And I wanted to say those types of things because it is important for us to start to have these conversations. I don't care how many times, don't call me, but my friends calling me at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm a military veteran. I have served with so many people, and I value those friendships. I retired. I have friendships that lasted 30 years. These conversations I have to have with them because they don't know.
And it's important to have the conversations, educate yourself, exhibit the behavior that's going to allow you to learn and grow. And I know we have so many other things we want to say here, but I guess we could do this for 4 hours probably and still keep going. But want to get you all into your breakout rooms. So what we're going to do is we're going to put you in breakout rooms, and I think we're going to do it. We only have about 10 minutes right now, so we're going to do a 10-minute breakout. And again, that's something we want to hear about as we come back. Just to have some, if anyone wants to share, we won't do a report out from everyone, but just take some quick shares. And then we're actually going to have a word from Sarah Smith, who's going to share with us just her perspective. And you've seen her in the chat already. So go into your breakouts. Anik, put the questions in there if you want to use those questions, or just have your own discussion. We'll spend about 10 minutes. We'll come back, start to wrap up. And also, if this is something that we want to continue to do, that's something we can consider, please let us know in the chat. We'll see if we can try to have this conversation that seems so sorely needed more often. So Anik is going to send us out, I believe, into our breakouts.
Yep.
So we have time just for probably, and again, if we do this again, we'll see if we can try to carve out more time. We just know everyone's so busy and everyone's overloaded with Zoom. So we were trying to keep the time as concise as possible, but I'm just loving the engagement and how truly passionate all of you are. So if we're able to pull this together again, and hopefully we will, we want to create more time for you all to have those discussions and those breakouts as well. But thank you for being here. And I'd love to hear one person report out. So we're gonna lower all hands here. And first person to electronically raise their hands, we will just take one quick share out and then we're gonna jump in here. Lynn? Whoops.
Okay, great. Yeah, my aha at the very close of our foursome is that because we happen to ask each other, why are we here? And what we have in common is we all have a reason for being here. And what's different is all our reasons are different. And that's what this is about. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Finding our commonality.
I'm going to break my own rule here because sometimes rules are made to be broken, and I'm going to invite Misha to unmute herself, and you'll be our last one of the day.
Hello, everyone. I'm from ICF South Florida, and I just want to first tell all of you, thank you for participating in this because, you know, I was sharing with our group that as a Black person, I'm not used to hearing a group of my white brothers and sisters talk about racism. It's usually in a group of either my family members or in a group of other Black male and females having this discussion. So I want to applaud all of your courage and vulnerability to be here on this line and speaking up. I learned so much from you all, just hearing like Kim's story, for example, and Michelle, just to have courage and speak up and speak out. Thank you. And I can't remember who it was that says, what does he do? What can he do every day to just say that you're a part of this? And the first thing that came to my mind, just speak up and speak out. And I just wanted to share that with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Misha. And thank you, both you and Lynn, for being our closing voices for today with those very strong points to wrap up this discussion with. We have locked down the chat because you guys have been so good about filling it up. We want to make sure you have access to the links that we're sharing. We're sharing a resources doc where all of the panelists have shared different resources, everything from podcasts to organizations you can contact if you want to learn more and grow more and step into the space and continue this conversation. And you also, there's a survey that we would love for you to have, if you that we would love to have your results from. So there's a Survey Monkey link there as well. So please make sure you get the links for the resources and also the link, click on the link for the survey. That's how we can determine what our next steps might be around doing more of this and having more of these conversations. And with that, Sarah Smith, my friend, if you are available with your shining smile and face there, would love to have you come in and share with the group, and we thank you for being here.
Tanya, thank you. You and your panel have been such a gift to us. You know, Akasha, your comments really touched my heart because I feel like I may have been blind as those good people that you were with. And so your stories are so, so helpful. Thank you all for bringing this conversation together. I wanted you all to know that by the way, I'm here as a member of ICF North Texas. I'm part of the family. And wanted to let you know that when I was asked to be a signature on that statement, I asked that we continue to work and put something behind it, that it couldn't just be a statement. And the thing that I say to all of you, and by the way, I am preaching to the choir, she said in a very Southern way. I mean, you're here, right? This is where we choose to be contributors, not just consumers of the ICF. This change will happen because we all change. Michelle Norris, you're inspirational to jump in and challenge people's, all lives matter. Thank you very much. You've just negated everybody else sort of argument. I want you to know that on a ICF Global is you, so don't think of it as separate. The coach training organization, they jumped in this within less than a day, and they have a work group that's multiracial and global, looking at how we can help coach training organizations begin to train so that Akasha doesn't have that experience anymore. And they're very intent. We and the other family organizations are challenging the organization, our staff, to be more diverse. We're not. If somebody says, you ICF are way too, polarized, the answer is yes, we are. And we're working hard to make that change. Please know that. If you look at your professional coaches board, it is incredibly diverse. It's also incredibly global, thank goodness. So we as a family organizations are really gearing up. And I will tell you, Aretha's doing a great job. And I want us to hire a diversity executive for the ICF. Someone for all over the world to look at the humanity, the social justice, all of the aspects of it for us on an ongoing basis. So just some of the, I don't think it's in the freezer. I think it's on a shelf. Sorry, just having a moment. So thank you all for giving me a moment. Thank you all for being the change you want to see in the world. And as you schedule more things, hey, I'm all over the Southeast region. I'm one of you, and I'll be here. So thank you. Any questions you have for me, let me know.
And thank you, Sarah, for joining us. And for any of you who haven't had a chance to engage with Sarah, every bit of what she said is nothing but 100% authentic truth. And she wants to hear from you. And we appreciate you being here. We appreciate all of you being here because we're almost right at our time. And again, we'll look for opportunities to do more of this. I think we were a little unsure of who would show up and how many would show up and how engaged you would be. And I feel the passion through the screen. I feel it through the inner tubes, through the internet itself. And we just thank you all for being here. Please continue this conversation locally, including the conversations that terrify you, including the conversations that until this point, we were probably all told you don't have in polite society, especially for those of us from the South. Those are things you don't talk about. We're talking about them now. Get out there, have those conversations, and be able to stand up in your values, lean into who you are and what you know is true and good and appropriate for humans on this planet. Because at the end of the day, coaches, non-coaches, whoever, we're people, and how we treat each other matters. So I thank you all again for coming, for being a part of our conversation, and hopefully we'll have more of these, especially as a Southeast region, given that we are in a especially poignant part of the world for this conversation. And we want to make sure that we're showing the world we're having the conversation because we want to create change. I thank you all. We are at time. Have a wonderful day. Peace and blessings and health to all of you, and continue the conversation.
Round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.